Yeah, hi there. These comments are for 3815, and this is Michael, and I am your critical thinking ELP instructor here at California State University. All right, so let's take a look at what you wrote here. So first of all, because you have article here, you have by Deborah Tannen here, you need passive voice here, right? Okay, so go to Google. This is something you need to remember. You're having a lot of verb tense problems. What is passive voice in English grammar? See if you can learn more about that. It says in this article, she focuses on the long-term relationships. You want to put S here between men and women. In this article, she mentions two different conversation ways in this relationship, and I'm going to use Tannen here, and it's a little awkward. I'm going to give you, maybe say this. And then use this here. She explains that cultural differences, because that's plural, I'm going to make this plural. Cultural differences in long-term relationships also lead to some conflicts. Now, what if we have two conversations where you say, Tannen cites that women's conversations are more, again, passive voice. This is the verbs. If you can figure out your verbs, you will definitely make a lot of improvements with your speaking and your writing, right? So I'm using the word conversations here, right? Why? Because you use it in your thesis. So Tannen cites that women's conversations are more focused on involvement. Women are often more attuned to men, to the meta messages of talk. The problem here is this sentence is very similar to what we see in the passage, which you don't want to do. Women are often more attuned. What if you say women often? Women often pay more attention than men. To meta messages. And then maybe put an indirect way of communicating. According to the author, a lot of trouble is caused between men and women by all things pronouns. Women often feel hurt when their partners use I or me in a situation which they would use we or us. Maybe here you can put, here maybe put a comma, change this to which, so you don't have that. You can connect this which, you might say which makes women feel more specifically uninvited. Women are more dissatisfied because of what they expect is different, as well as what they see as the significance of talk itself. See, this is also a problem. Is in this paragraph, a lot of what you're saying is directly coming from Tannen. Even you have this long quote here, but you have this sentence here that I had to change. You might want to say here, so you don't say because of their, how about this? Differing expectations So if you change that, it doesn't look as similar to what we saw in the reading passage. Okay, let's take a look at the other one. So I like your use of this word. This is effective because it shows a contrast from what you said in the previous paragraph. So on the other hand, men, and what I would do here again, men's conversations are more focused. Notice how I'm using here the passive voice. So I have the be verb, I have the past participle. Remember how we studied irregular verbs in the beginning of this class? It looks like you don't understand the past participle. I mean, you understood it when you did the irregular verb quizzes, but I really don't think you understand it. You're not sure when to use past participle, but in this case, I put men's conversations are more focused on independence in their relationships. They like to be silent more than talk deepos on the subject. They're less likely to pay much attention at the time. This doesn't really work very well because we have to tie this back to independence. So because they're independents, they use fewer meta messages than their female counterparts. These ideas, they also like to make jokes more than women. When they like to use indirect conversations, men. The problem is a lot of this, she does talk about this, but she's saying that men and women have different expectations when they're communicating to each other. But I would focus a lot of this on the independence thing. So you might say, as a result, men tend to use fewer meta messages in conversations. And toward this aim, many men Tannen explains okay, let's see, toward this aim, many men Now, the other thing is, if you talk about they're less likely to pay more attention, they make more jokes, they like to use indirect conversation. And who is they? I'm assuming they means men, right? They like to use, no, they like to use more direct conversation. Men like to give advice. But whatever you say here, it needs to go back to what you set up here. So if you talk about pronouns here, and then you talk about differing expectations here, you should probably talk about it here. You might say, why am I saying this? Remember, if you're doing a compare and contrast, I don't know if you remember when we looked at Mark Twain's Two Views of the Mississippi, he brought up 7 things in one paragraph, and then when he went to the next paragraph, he compared the other view exactly to those 7 things. So we have to compare, because you mentioned pronouns here, we also need to mention pronouns here. So unlike women, men are typically not hurt when their significant other include pronouns which do not include them. Now, if you get into this last part, you're talking about this silent. They're less likely to pay much attention. I don't know. You might say something like because. In addition, this is something you can also do, is you need to do a little bit better job connecting ideas together in this paragraph. You move from one sentence to the next without cohesively tying these things together. You did say also and moreover, but still the sentences don't connect that well. So in addition, men do not pay and maybe you say something like that. So in addition, men typically do not pay as much attention to the details in conversations because they were not expected to retell this type of information when they were boys, adds Tannen. And this is probably good enough for this. We don't have to get into all this information exactly. Finally, if the conversation between male and females I'm going to say that let's see if we can get this going here. Yeah, in your conclusion paragraph, I'd probably say something like this. Finally, Tannen offers some solutions near the end of the article. Couples in long-term relationships, maybe we can put, for instance, can minimize these misunderstandings if they're at least aware of the differences in styles of talk between men and women. Consequently, these couples can compromise by slightly adopting the other's conversational styles in an effort to be more compatible. All right, let's look at it one more time. The article is written by Deborah Tannen in 2006. In this article, she focuses on the long-term relationships between men and women. In this article, Tannen mentions two different conversation ways in this relationship, and she explains that cultural differences in long-term relationships, I'm going to put can also lead, which means it doesn't happen all the time. Tannen cites that women's conversations are more focused on involvement. Women often pay more attention to men to the meta messages talk, an indirect way of communicating. According to the author, a lot of trouble is caused between men and women by all things. Pronouns. Women often feel hurt when their partners use I or me in a situation which they would use we or us, which makes women feel more specifically uninvited. Women are dissatisfied more than men because of their differing expectations. Maybe differing expectations, they hold regarding conversations. On the other hand, men's conversations are more focused on independence in their relationships. How about 10 and illustrates? As a result, men tend to use fewer meta messages in conversations. Toward this aim, many men tend, and explains, speak more directly in conversations. Unlike women, men are typically not hurt when their significant others include pronouns which do not include them. I put that in there because you already said it in the previous paragraph. You want to make sure you're showing the contrast. In addition, men typically do not pay as much attention to the details in conversation because they were not expected to retell this type of information when they were boys, as Tannen. Finally, Tannen offers some solution near the end of the article. Couples in long-term relationships, for instance, can minimize these misunderstandings if they're at least aware of the differences in styles of talk between men and women. Consequently, these couples can compromise by slightly adopting the other's conversational styles in an effort to be more compatible. And that's it. So I think you're getting a little bit better than before. I think here you did not have really any inaccuracies. You could probably improve your structure slightly, or you can improve your grammar and your word choice. So for you, I'd like you to go to the, how about go to the lab maybe twice a week right now and work on your grammar skills. I think that's really where you need to make your improvements, right? We already know that you don't know how to form your verbs, right? We know that. I've known that for a few weeks. And we also know through this summary, you're having a lot of trouble with passive voice, or you're having trouble with active voice, or you're having trouble, structuring your ideas and so on. The other problem is a lot of times, because you're limited with your grammar and your vocabulary, you have to rely on either quoting or using exactly the same sentence from the passage without putting it in quotations. Either way, it's unoriginal. So your grammar and your vocabulary limitations are making it hard for you to summarize, because how can you summarize if you don't have the grammar and the vocabulary to do that? So that's also something you can work on. I think if you go to my online TOEFL course, here's my suggestion. Really focus on the vocabulary words. Vocabulary lesson number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6. Those would be really important lessons for you right now. All right, so for the grade here, I still think it's not terrible, so I think it's better. I'm going to put you at 85% out of 100. If you were in a graduate class right now, you would not pass, definitely. Your instructor probably would be very upset because of your limitations. Remember, in your graduate study, your professors are not expecting you to have trouble with passive or active voice. They're expecting you already know how to form your verbs. You know how to structure your sentences, right? And they're expecting that you won't quote too much when you summarize, and that when you're not quoting, you'll use original sentences using your own grammar and your own vocabulary. So these are expectations that your graduate professors are going to have. So if you don't solve these problems now, they're going to be even worse for you next quarter. So that's why you want to really focus on solving these issues. All right, so thank you for doing